Bienvenidos a Teología sin vergüenza, teología queer feminista que hace fluir la justicia.
¿Cuántas personas cristianas conoces tú que viven sin vergüenza, como queer y o feministas? Casi no se escucha de nosotros, pero sí existimos.
Estamos por todas partes, luchando en la academia, en las iglesias, en las casas y en las calles. Luchamos por nuestras comunidades y por nuestras propias vidas.
No somos machos, pero somos muchas.
Somos queer feministas sin vergüenza de tener fe. Somos teólogas sin vergüenza de ser activistas. Somos las sinvergüenzas.
Le sacamos el jugo a la Biblia para producir teología queer feminista que refresque la lucha y haga venir la justicia.
En cada episodio encontrarás teología bien jugosa, como agua de papaya.
¡Chúpetela!
Hola, bienvenidos a Teología sin vergüenza, teología queer feminista que hace fluir la justicia.
Esta vez en inglés.
En inglés. Pues bueno, estamos grabando esto como para darles la bienvenida, para inaugurar oficialmente la temporada en inglés de Teología sin vergüenza. Como quizás saben, Teología sin vergüenza surgió como un proyecto de personas queer y feministas que a la vez son activistas y teólogas, teólogues, biblistas en América Latina y su diáspora. Y a través de varios años y varias temporadas hemos podido entrevistar a muchas personas en muchos países de América Latina, del Caribe y de su diáspora, hablando de sus experiencias sin vergüenzas. Y algo que desde hace tiempo sabíamos que queríamos hacer era una temporada en inglés, porque sabemos que la diáspora de América Latina, no todas esas personas hablan español, ¿no? Muchas de esas personas por procesos de migración, pues ahora hablan inglés, ¿no? Hablan inglés y sabíamos que tenían historias que contar y hoy más que nunca con el panorama político que está sucediendo en Estados Unidos y la forma en la que la religión está siendo instrumentalizada para justificar violencia en contra de las personas latinas, las personas negras, racializadas, las personas migrantes. Sabíamos que era el momento para hablar de esto desde nuestra posición, ¿no? Desde nuestra posición como sinvergüenzas. Y pues sí, hoy acabamos de grabar el primer episodio. Cuéntanos, Alba, ¿qué tal estuvo ese primer episodio?
¡Ya! ¡Qué emoción! Sí, estaba súper bien. Me interesa mucho ver cómo es la respuesta en inglés, porque, pues sí, esto es para introducir un poquito de qué es teología sin vergüenza a las personas que no hablan español o por lo menos que hablan inglés como segundo idioma, porque a veces personas hablan portugués, pero español es como no está dentro de ese rango, pero inglés sí, porque todo el mundo lee en inglés las cosas académicas, etcétera. Entonces, me emociona ver que, pero hoy hablamos con Liz, que fue la coanfitriona por años y años, y para orientar al revés, como orientar la comunidad en inglés, que tal vez es la primera vez que están encontrando teología sin vergüenza, para entender un poquito cómo iniciamos durante la pandemia en 2020 y qué era la idea, las ideas o la ideología para teología sin vergüenza y cuáles ideologías estábamos combatiendo con abrir este espacio comunal para teología queer y feminista. Entonces, muy lindo después de 5 años, no puedo creerlo, pero 5 años después de regresar a esos momentos y pensar cómo iniciamos y conocer un poquito más a Liz, a mí un poquito, porque somos más conocidos, creo, en América Latina que en los Estados Unidos. Entonces, me gustaría saber de ti, qué opinas o cuál momentos fue la más clave para ti en esta conversación regresando tantos años atrás.
Sí, pues como dices, entonces este primer episodio de la temporada en inglés fue con la reverenda doctora Lis Valle. Y
Yeah.
fue bien interesante para mí, pues siempre que hablamos con Liz, yo estoy acostumbrada a hablar en español y es
Sí.
interesante escucharles hablar a ti y a ella en inglés. Am,
Raro, ¿no?
Es raro, sí, sí, se siente raro, pero al mismo tiempo también creo que nos permitió ver otra faceta de ella, como que creo que
Mm,
quienes quizás siguen la teología sin vergüenza, pues conocen este lado más irreverente de Liz en español, eh, con sus amigas platicando y entrevistando, pero hoy creo que conocimos una faceta de Liz como una mujer de Puerto Rico que vive en Estados Unidos, en Chicago específicamente, ¿no? En una zona que no es particularmente grande la población latina, en un seminario teológico, ¿no? Y lo que implica habitar lugares predominantemente blancos, académicos, teológicos, siendo sinvergüenza, ¿no? Entonces siento que hoy pude ver más de esa Liz, ¿no? Y quienes puedan ver el episodio nos contarán qué les parece, ¿no? Pero algo que a mí me pareció muy interesante fue como escuchar de Liz esta historia de cómo ha aprendido a romper reglas, ¿no? O cómo
o como ha intentado a no romperlas,
y la sigue
pero
rompiendo, no puede, ¿no?
sí,
O sea, como
no
esta
puede.
sinvergüenzura que la ha llevado a romper reglas en todo lugar, en todo momento, y que, y que hoy es gran parte de lo que ella es, ¿no? Y que es
Ujú,
parte de una práctica espiritual. eh, Me gustó mucho que le preguntaras acerca de su relación con las instituciones, ¿no? Y creo que Liz
ujú.
habita una intersección que quienes hemos tenido como relación con la academia de alguna forma u otra, podemos saber lo hostil que puede ser
Sí.
y el hecho de que Liz sea una mujer con un doctorado, ¿no? Que da clases y experimenta, sí, no sé, siento que es un tipo de vivencia bien fuerte, ¿no? Bien dura y como bien, como contracorriente, contracultural. Y me gustó escucharla
Ujú.
hablar de eso, ¿no? Escucharla hablar de cómo todos los días en esos espacios es una lucha, ¿no? Y hay cosas que aprende a negociar, cosas que no está dispuesta a soltar y que no va a soltar, ¿no? Por más problemáticas que sean. Am, Me gustó mucho escucharla hablar de eso. Eso fue algo muy bonito.
Sí, a mí también como me tocó el corazón un poquito nuevo para mí de escucharla también mostrar en su creatividad cómo la resistencia puede existir cómo puede existir una persona dentro de instituciones en crear ciertos personajes
Claro.
que se usa en ciertos momentos para, para mostrar la parte de una que quiere o que necesita para sobrevivir un espacio o para estar en una postura de poder o pues, de aceptación dentro de ciertas instituciones y cómo podía sentir como creando esos personajes que pueden existir dentro de estas instituciones tan hostiles, le permite parte de ella mantenerse viva y segura en otra parte de sí misma. Entonces yo creo que mucha gente, muchas de nosotras puede reconocer eso dentro de nosotras, pero que ella lo haga tan explícitamente que tiene nombres, que tiene como su disfraz por cada una de esas etapas de vida. Me pareció muy buena estrategia y un uso de la creatividad y la imaginación que creo que es algo que nos podía ayudar a muchos.
Claro, sí, totalmente. También creo que fue fuerte para mí escucharla hablar acerca del momento que estamos experimentando ahora en el mundo y específicamente quienes viven en Estados Unidos y su forma de nombrar como el miedo, ¿no? el miedo y algo que nosotros hemos nombrado terrorismo espiritual, ¿no? Esa
Yeah.
sensación de que las personas migrantes, las personas racializadas en Estados Unidos no sienten seguridad en ningún lado, ¿no? Están siendo
Yep.
perseguidas, o sea, muy literalmente. Y
Mhm.
lo que eso implica también para cómo leemos a Dios. Y creo que eso va a ser un hilo conductor entre las diferentes personas que entrevistes durante esta temporada en inglés. Y creo que,
Mhm.
o sea, mi oración y mi anhelo es que a lo largo de esas conversaciones también imaginemos otras formas de ver a Dios, ¿no? O sea, como que hacer como estos procesos de resistencia, de no estamos dispuestas a que ese sea el Dios en el que creemos, ¿no? A que
Amen.
coopten nuestra fe a través de ese miedo, ¿no? A través de ese terror. Entonces fue fuerte y lindo al mismo tiempo escuchar a Liz hablando de cómo lo ha vivido ella, ¿no? Que también tiene una perspectiva, siento que bien única, como muy específica, como una mujer que es pastora, eh, que estudia esto, ¿no? O sea, a un nivel académico, y también que es una mujer de Puerto Rico, ¿no? Y el lugar geopolítico de Puerto Rico, ¿no? Como parte de
Mhm.
Estados Unidos, pero al mismo tiempo no, ¿no? Ese en medio creo que hace que Liz tenga una perspectiva muy brillante, ¿no? O sea, muy clara sobre lo que está pasando, ¿no? Y eso me lleva a la otra cosa que quería decir, que a lo largo del episodio eh, conversaron acerca de lo que significa el hogar, ¿no? ¿Dónde habitamos?
Mhm.
¿Dónde le llamamos hogar? Y
Mhm.
que siento que también va a ser una constante en estas conversaciones de personas hablando de diáspora, hablando de migración, ¿no? De historias de transiciones. Lisa hablaba de cómo para ella hacer hogar es hacer comunidad, encontrar personas
Mhm.
que también compartan tus kings, que también compartan tus dudas, ¿no? O sea, acercarte. El hecho de que
Mhm.
Liz se haya acercado a ti porque en una clase le gustó lo que preguntabas, creo que viene mucho de ese espíritu diaspórico, ¿no? Y ese espíritu
Sí,
de migración, de migrantes, ¿no? O sea, como de dónde está mi gente aquí, ¿no? O sea, cómo puedo acercarme, ¿no? O sea, ese
exactamente.
anhelo de encontrarme en otros, que veo
Mhm.
mucho en Liz, veo mucho en ti y creo que vamos a estar viendo mucho en los demás, de los demás episodios.
Sí, de fijo va a ser un tema que repite una y otra vez. Pues espero que les guste este episodio con Reverenda Doctora Lis Valle-Ruiz y que esperan más episodios de la temporada en inglés.
Sí, y si tienen alguna duda, comentario, nos pueden escribir en todas nuestras redes, @teosinvergüenza o por correo teosinvergüenza@soulforce.org, en inglés o en español. Ustedes mándenos lo que quieran decirnos y ahí estaremos nosotros para contestar. Nos da mucho gusto que estén aquí en esta nueva aventura. Adiós.
Somos las envergüenzas. ¿Eres tú uno de nosotros?
Sí, sí, sí.
Sí. Chao. Hello. I feel like
Ay,
I feel like we should be like, bienvenidos a Teología sin vergüenza, teología queer feminista que hace fluir la justicia. It's like
yes.
Okay, so we are going to just get into a conversation today because you are the original sin vergüenza. And it feels really important to revisit. We have 8 seasons and 70 something episodes in Spanish of this podcast. And this is the first time we're finally getting to English. And so I'm hoping that in our conversation, we'll be able to talk a little bit more about what is Teología sin vergüenza? What is this thing that folks who are listening for the first time getting into? What have we been up to? And we can't possibly do that without starting with you because you and I were the original sinvergüenzas that started this whole thing back in 2020 for the podcast. So let's start how we used to start, which is I am Reverend Sex, also known as Alba Onofrio. I am in Mexico City right now, and I am so excited to have you with us today. Tell me you.
Hi, I'm Lis Valle, sometimes known as Sophia Divinatrix, and I am in Chicago, Illinois, north of the United States. I'm so glad to be here with you.
I know, it's so strange speaking in English also.
Yeah, it's also very, yes, exactly. I have to be mindful not to switch.
That's okay. We'll switch and we'll switch back, just like we did when we were in Spanish and somebody started speaking in English. We'll just rewind and redo. But okay, so tell us a little bit about you and your connection to me and Teología sin vergüenza, and what is sin vergüenza? Like, tell us anything you want to, and then we'll jump into like what is sin vergüenza and all that stuff. But you go. Okay. What do you want to what should we tell our audience?
I think we start with identify myself as a sinvergüenza, shameless, and sinvergüenza. Yes, I self-identify as a shameless person. Because my grandma used to call me that when I was a little kid.
What is it? Tell us for you, what does sinvergüenza mean? And when was it used in the context of your life?
Yes, in Puerto Rico, sinvergüenza as a single word, right? As a single word, sinvergüenza is a person who is mischievous, like it doesn't, is a person without manners, really. Is when an adult says to a child, you are a sinvergüenza, is that the child is misbehaving, is not having good manners, and it should behave. So I was always a misbehaved child, I guess. With my adult eyes, I think with my adult interpretation, I think I always found out that they were rules because I broke them. That's how I found out that there were rules. Yes. I was a free-spirited person. Some people might not believe that about myself, but once upon a time I was. And then I found out that there were rules, and that's how, adults would like tell me, no, there's a rule against that, and then make my life miserable by letting me know that there was a rule against that, and then shape me into a not so free-spirited person and teach me, what a good Christian was, especially a good girl. Christian woman, girl, Christian woman eventually. And that totally messed up with my mojo. Yes. And that's a long story about my life. But sinvergüenza. And then, 2 words would mean without shame, which I did carry a lot of shame for a long time. And sometimes it creeps back because, trauma healing is a lifelong journey. Yes. And it's not a single, it's not a linear process. It comes and goes. But here we are claiming that we are still a shameless person, a sinvergüenza who does sinvergüenzuras, still misbehaving, especially to dismantle patriarchy in religious spaces, and to dismantle heterosexism and heteronormativity and all of that stuff that Teología sin vergüenza since the beginning has been against.
Yes, it's so true. And sinvergüenza in a lot of contexts is a highly gendered and sexualized term. Like it very much reminds me of this, like your skirt's too short and your mouth is too loud and you have a little bit too many opinions. And so I feel
your legs are too spread apart. Your legs. Yes. You have to sit like a lady.
Yes, the closest thing I have in English growing up in the South was like, have you no shame? Like, young lady, have you no shame? Like, that was, we don't have that beautiful sinvergüenza word that really captures all of that. But the closest we had was that phrase, which was just like, if you didn't have shame, it was telling you that you better go find that shame because you've misplaced it because you're supposed to have shame about whatever the thing is that you're doing at this moment.
But isn't that so accurate? Because what they do is to place shame on you, and through shame, they control your social behavior. Yes. And it's real shame. It's real shame that it's so hurtful.
Yes.
It damages the soul.
Yes, amen. And I think that's why we picked that name, because it was like the wrong people have the wrong, it's the wrong people who are carrying the shame, and we shouldn't be shamed or feel shame or guilt around our sexuality or our faith or our activism or pushing back and not being compliant with systems of oppression. The people who should be feeling shame are the people who are perpetuating these systems of harm. And yet we're the ones being called out because we're not holding the right social norms that are expected of us. So I think that was I don't know what you remember 5 long years ago in the middle of pandemic lockdown, but that felt like one of the things that are kind of themes of both of our lives that we kind of connected with, going to school together in Nashville and having that moment of learning about each other in really different contexts where we come from and like how we grew up, but yet so much the same in terms of the shame that we've experienced around gender and sexuality in confronting these systems and having to heal and come out of the closet again and again and again from that shame and guilt that was put on us to try to control our social behavior.
Yes, I remember too that there were 3 things that were important. So when we started planning before the pandemic hit.
Yes.
But then when the pandemic hit, I remember that we kind of rushed things to get it out, because it's like people are indoors, so this is the time to do it. And then we had a hard time inviting people to record, because of course people were more worried about other things. We were in the middle of a pandemic. People were worried about life and death things, which these things are. We can get more to that soon. So then that's why we went live. We started, instead of going pre-recorded, we started going live because that made more sense for people than pre-recording. But 3 things that we were looking for, that you did some research and you were like, Liz, I'm having a hard time finding people that can, people find weird that we very comfortably connect activism and theology and queerness.
Yes.
And in Latin America. Maybe in the United States, that's not so odd, but you were around the world doing this, the work that you do in Latin America, and people were like, wait, but you're an activist and Christian? Wait, but you are queer and Christian? But you are the 3 in 1? Like, how is that? And that was part of what kind of moved us into creating this space to have conversations and also to introduce one another to our friends who are those 3 things, the 3 in 1 kind of thing.
Yes,
that was
because,
part of it.
Well, I mean, it's been an intentional monopoly by the far right, in addition to exporting resources and like Sunday school lessons and sermon seeds, has been to control and completely monopolize Spanish language media channels. And that was where we were like, there's books, there's tons of brilliant, beautiful academic work being done, but like accessible in like conversation style, listen, talk, really easily accessible for everyday people, even in rural places, even for people who can't afford fancy books. And so we were like, let's just start talking to our friends, because I know some people, you know some people. And you were like, the Spirit told me we need to do Facebook Live. I'd never seen a Facebook Live.
I was like, there was something about Spirit.
You were like, the Spirit told me. And I was like, Lis, I've never even been on Facebook Live. I've never seen one. You're like, well, open it up. Let's get started. So here we are 5 years later. How were those seasons for you? We took a little break last year because we did the International Queer Feminist Theology Encounter here in Mexico City with folks from like 13 countries celebrating the first 3 years of Teología sin vergüenza. But as you reflect back on so many, I mean, more than 70 episodes, we went to Cuba, we went to Costa Rica, we have done things online all over the place. What stands out, or what do you think is like one of the lasting takeaways from that content for folks who maybe didn't get to hear it the first time in Spanish?
For me, it was life-giving to be part of the first, I don't know how many seasons I was part of. And then the comebacks every now and then. Thank you for inviting me to be part of the Cuba season. Cuba. as they say in English, they say Cuba. It's been life-giving. People who know me have seen like, when you are in those episodes, you are alive. And it's like, and it's true. It's so bad that my job consumed me, and I turned my time and energy into paying the bills. But this,
as many of us have had to do.
Yeah. but this job is very life-giving to me, and I hope it was for the many people that went through the show, that came as guests, and it was for me very life-giving that eventually we started to know by name the regular listeners, because especially at the beginning when it was live, we could see the comments that they were making at the same time that we were speaking. And it was conversation with the guests, right? So we would see who was making what comments. So we started like learning by name, knowing by name our followers. So that was very, very amazing. And I think that relates to something we were talking about earlier about home, that during the pandemic, I found that home for me was spread around the globe.
Yes.
That I didn't find home in Chicago where I live. I didn't find home in Puerto Rico where I'm from. My home, my people were spread around the world, and the thing is that there are very few in numbers wherever they are, wherever we are. So and so that need that we found back then, I have found that in the United States, there's you can find a lot of people that are very comfortable being queer and Christian, and usually they're white. Yeah. Usually people of color are like Christians, like churches that are churches of people of color, like Black churches, Latino churches. I don't know a lot about like Korean American churches or Korean churches, but they tend to be very conservative churches, and they cannot fathom the idea that Christians can be queer, or that queers can be Christian. And so I have found that there's or activists. It's like they think politics and religion don't mix. Yes. And so that the need for have those conversations, that those three things can coexist in a single person, is real among communities of people of color in the United States as well.
I think that's so that gets at what we're doing, which is one of the questions I was thinking about was like, what's going to make this season in English different? And I think part of that is this, like in Latin America, we found not a single soul who didn't understand that religion was critical to whatever was happening in activism in the world, in politics. Like religion was right there, and particularly Christianity, because that's the religion of power in our hemisphere, was like right there. And lots of countries are even confessionally Christian or Catholic or whatever. And here we have kind of this myth in the mainstream that there's a separation of church and state, and there's all this mythology around it. But I think in our communities, particularly immigrant communities, and those of us who are like first generation and still very connected to those past, that part about being in diaspora from land and people that you're from, and also being in diaspora because you are queer or because you're a feminist or an activist, and those things not mixing in the intentionally created conservative denominations that our people come into when they come into this country. I think it's really important that we talk about that, because rainbows in general, at least in my experience, like for communities who have been out forever, they're like, oh my God, the rainbows, roll your eyes. But whenever I go throughout the world in the global South, rainbows are still really important. Like people get really hyped. And I think the same thing is true in our communities here, that it's like, it's still a really brave thing. And I think now as politics is getting more and more difficult, it feels less like a foregone conclusion that you can just have rainbows and be out as queer or trans anywhere. But I think in our communities, it's always been true that to be queer and or feminist and a person of faith in in your community, in your faith community, which houses so much of your culture and your language and your people when they immigrate to the US from other places, like that's still a very scary and brave thing, because it actually has very real consequences for most of our lives in terms of whether or not we're going to continue to be accepted in a place that's like home, even if we're in diaspora. So I feel like queer people, activists, feminists, and like immigrant people, we have those parallels. And I don't know a lot about other immigrant communities more beyond like people whose roots come from Latin America, but I feel that resonance deeply of like the colonizer with its colonizing religion made us kin. And so in some of those ways, it feels like maybe in English, this will help us see each other a little bit more, or at least like come out of the closet to be like, this is still a very real ongoing concern for a whole bunch of us. It's not just a foregone conclusion that like, well, just go to the next church down the way that is inclusive or does welcome you and your partner or whatever. Like, that's not true that for us in the same way.
No, it's not. No. Have you heard the term sexiled?
No, tell me about it.
I'm not an expert in the concept, but a friend of mine told me about sexiled, and it made sense to me because I have a lot of friends who left Puerto Rico even before me, way before me, because when they came to terms with their own sexual orientation and they wanted to be ministers, and they knew that in Puerto Rico they couldn't be ministers and queer.
Yes.
Back then, when they left, they couldn't be Christians and queer.
Yes.
Even today, I was having a conversation today with a religious leader in Puerto Rico, and he was telling me like, there are things that in Puerto Rico, they still, like in seminaries in Puerto Rico, you couldn't teach. Like conservatives are taking over the island in the same ways that they are taking over the United States. So sexiles are people who left Puerto Rico, because Puerto Rico is more than an island. It's many islands, left Puerto Rico because of their sexual orientation, so they can live freely their sexuality without fear. So they exiled themselves. They became part of the diaspora because of their sexual orientation, which is a different reason that in my case, I became part of the diaspora because of other reasons. I thought it was, it was because I was running away from a very bad marriage, even though it was over the marriage. But then I later found out that it was part of a social phenomenon that was going on, right? That it had to do with class and it had to do with colonization. So a lot of people moved because of the exploitation of the island and the economical conditions and looking for jobs and better. So that's how I left the island. I found a job outside of Puerto Rico. But many of my friends who left the island were also from the island. They left because of their sexuality. And some of them still became pastors, but some of them didn't. Some of them, they just renounced to their calling altogether. And then many years, decades, even later, my denomination we accepted what back then they called same-sex marriage. And later we accepted the ordination of queer people, which was kind of a very interesting way of going about things. And in Puerto Rico, even though we're part of the same denomination, we're not there. That hasn't happened yet. So in the books, that is true. But in the ethos of Puerto Rico, that hasn't, in practice, is not true. Because the beliefs of the people are too ingrained to move away to a different practice. And it's the irony of this is that the indigenous people didn't have all this that we have. It was colonization that taught us about heteronormativity and the idea of monogamy, the idea of the virginity. It's a construct that stay a virgin until married.
That virginity is even a thing, that you go from one state to another state.
Yeah, exactly. That is it. All of that came with European culture. Yeah. And then they put it in the guise of Christianity and morality. So then they impose all of that. And now, and now it's like we have the impression that it's the liberal or progressive churches that are moving away to something else, when in reality, the indigenous people had that liberation, that had that different theology long ago, way before colonization.
Right. It depends on what you mean by traditional. Do we mean traditional as in the traditional European Victorian era white man theology? Or do we mean traditional like way back, like way back, in which case we have to get rid of a lot of the constructs of like sexual goodness or morality? And, you know, you're one of the people, I love you so much for so many reasons, but I feel like one of the ways that we connected was this work around sex and sexuality. And you are one of the most adventurous people that I know. And I really love that because, you know, you said, hi, I'm Lis, right? But you are Reverend Doctor. You are a professor at a seminary. You actually, this year in October, in a couple of months, is the 10th anniversary of you ordaining me in front of community. So you have a lot of roles in institutional, you know, the boxes that one needs to check for success. You have checked all of those boxes. You've done the PhD, you have been the professor, you have been the ordained minister, clergy. So that for me is one of those beautiful juxtapositions where it's like, oh, you're supposed to be the epitome of institutional, organized idea of what's good. And yet I find you to be one of the most creative people and one of the most adventurous sexually to explore, like what is true about your body, what is true about your pleasure, what is true about your desire, how do you mix creativity in every possible way that also includes your sexuality, which for me is like very hard to come by. And the longer we're in institutions, especially academic ones or church ones, the harder that is to hold on to. So I'm curious if you still, that's how I encountered you all those many years ago. So tell me a little bit about where do we find you today? What's up? What's been in your recent explorations? How do you identify these days? Does that still feel true to you? How did you maintain that adventurous spirit in spite of being in all these institutions?
Yeah, well, I think adventurous is that is a good character trait. As I said, socialization really killed my soul, in church especially. So there's a name for it, right? Purity culture.
Yes.
So my denomination comes from the Puritans. And everything that you said about the explorations, adventures with my sexuality was not a thing until after my divorce, many years after my divorce. Maybe it started when I was 38. But
I love that.
But this is the thing. My beef now with sexual purity is because I was like, if it has not been taught to me, in the high school that I went to, many of my classmates ended up being pregnant before they got married, which I did too, but I was one of the latest. I did that at 19, when many of my peers did that at 14, 15, 16. So for me to do that at 19 was like, I was almost an adult.
To have sex or to get pregnant?
Both happen almost simultaneously because of sexuality purity, you know?
Yes.
Sexual purity. So anyway, so if I didn't have all of those teachings from the church, if I had a different teaching from the church instead of Puritanism, then
and science, like what it means to get pregnant or not.
I had the science. I had the science. I just, tweaked with it a little bit, I didn't count well, or I counted the way I counted because I wanted to have sex. And the first time, anyway, let's not dwell on the past. I have 2 beautiful kids. And then I got married. I shouldn't have gotten married. And then some other things, my mother did try to dissuade me to getting married. She told me I didn't have to get married. So kudos to her for that. Yes. But I married the first guy.
And she's a pastor.
She's a pastor.
I love her. I love that. Yes. She has grown alongside you leaps and bounds.
And we were telling the story of me celebrating the 11th anniversary of my ordination. And she was making jokes about bizcochos and milk. Bizcochos in Mexico, it doesn't mean the same thing as in Puerto Rico. Bizcocho in English is cake, but the Spanish word that we use in Puerto Rico for cake, in Mexico is used for the private parts of the women, for vulva. So, and she was making jokes with a Mexican dude in my ordination anniversary about eating the cake and drinking the milk, which is another euphemism for semen. Anyway, so
I love her. Kudos to her. But you got married to the first man you had sex with.
Yes, exactly.
Because of purity culture.
Exactly. And it was like something like I quote unquote lost my virginity, quote unquote, because as you said, I had been exploring and we and I had conversations about like how creative you can be when you are in this purity culture. And it's like, if virginity is defined, penis inside a vagina, we go around that in many ways.
I was the most creative human. I mean, I could just find 16 ways from Sunday to avoid. I'm like, we just got one act we have to avoid, one thing.
Yeah.
Done.
We do other things. So we were very creative. So anyway, so I was very adventurous with my husband, but anyway, the cool stuff started when I was 38. After the divorce, I was still in this thing of looking for a guy to date who will like not have sex until we had not sex in the penis, vagina penetration kind of thing. Also being creative around that, all of that thing. I was still there until I went to Vanderbilt and I met Alba. And there are not many Latino people, not when I was there. There were maybe 3 of us.
When I went to visit, and that you were in the PhD program, when I went to visit, I asked about about Latinas, and kudos to the lovely admissions officer person who was like, "Oh, we're hoping you'll bring that. We gave you a scholarship literally so you could." And I was like, "Oh."
They wanted you to be the first. Oh my God.
It was very direct. I mean, I asked a direct question and I got a direct answer, which I appreciated, but. So when we talk about being the first, we were like that first cohort. You, me, and Brisca, who was another sinvergüenza.
Were more. Because I was there for longer, so the PhD is longer than the MDiv. So after the 3 of us were there, they were up to 10 maybe Latinos at the same time. So that was cool. Anyway, so I did a lot of explorations, and after I moved to Chicago, it was even better because I had my friend who I was like, hey, I created this character, Sophia Divinatrix, who is inspiring, like, being a dominatrix. And then I started reading about dominatrix. So I learned that you can like take classes to be a dominatrix. So we started going to King conferences. It's been great. So yeah, since 38 to here, I have been exploring other things like the King conferences and the swingers community and non-monogamy and dating women and dating couples. And the most recent one that I was really excited about was pegging a guy. That was really awesome.
Yes.
So I'm excited about doing all of those things. And I really, the non-monogamy part, I was really suspecting it my whole life. Because when I was in 8th grade, for the first time, I heard people talking about some father of some student. Somebody was like, oh, so-and-so left his wife for somebody else. And I was like, so what's the problem? And at the moment, I was like, if they stop loving the wife, well, just let him leave the wife and go with the other one because they're just going to hurt more if they or stay just because, that didn't like in my head. I couldn't. So, and then I meet Alba and I reach out to Alba. This is why I mentioned that the lack of Latinos, because I reached Alba because you were the only other Latino other than Prisca, but you were in class with me and I loved your comments in class. That's why I reached out to you. And then
I have no idea what I said.
And I don't remember, but it was after a while, a few different sessions have gone by and I was like in love with Alba's comments and I follow you. I remember exactly where we were, and you were able to step out of the building. And then I was like, hey, Alba, wait up. And then we were talking there and they just said something about you being non-monogamy. And I remember that I took a step back because like, hey, I'm a recovering evangelical. And it's still ingrained in my, in my being. So my body took a step back. I was like, oh, that's like a lot for me, non-monogamy. So I've been learning
Yes.
in books and also in conferences, the practices and the philosophy of all this stuff. Maybe I shouldn't be saying this thing publicly when I am a professor, like I was a professor at a seminary. But and anyway, I had come to embrace. I was saying I do want to share the story that I started dating a person who is a leader, a religious leader, and I don't know that we are dating. As maybe you can call us lovers. And we, at some point, we had the conversation of like, wait a minute, I just embrace myself as a non-monogamous person, and you are monogamous. And if this goes well, what are we going to do about that? And we had that conversation of like, oh, and then we left it at that. And then the next time we saw each other, we were like, okay, listen, I've been thinking. And I was like, I've been thinking, and if being with you means that I have to give up non-monogamy, then I don't want to be with you, because it took me a lot to get to this point of accepting myself. And he said, well, I have been thinking, and I don't want you to give up non-monogamy to be with me, because I want to enjoy you, the fullness of you. So I was like, oh my God, this is so awesome.
Yes, literally.
So that's why we kept going. So anyway, that story I did want to share, because maybe I have reached the point. Now I'm at the point in which I'm very choosy of what I'm looking for. I was, for the last few years, I've been like, hey, if it is good sex, I'm taking it, while I find more steady partners.
Yep.
But now I'm like, no, I know exactly what I want. And so I'm not going to dedicate any time and energy on relationships that are not what I want, because I need that time and energy to find what I want. And there's nothing wrong, right? To just have, I don't want to shame anybody. Shameless here is about not shaming anyone.
But the way you got there is so much more organic. If like I truly believe that at different moments in our lives, different things are right for us. Like sometimes it's the exploratory phase where we're figuring out what feels good in this moment, in this body. Because, the body that I have now at 45 is not the body that I had at 25, and is not the body I'm going to have at 65. So it's like there is things about my body, about my life, about my finances, about my circumstances. So the idea, it's really wild and cool that you are getting to this place where you're like, this is what I'm looking for, and I'm going to date for that, and that's what I'm going to spend my time and energy. Because so many of us, and you've shared your own stories, right, about like we go to what's right because that's what's allowed, and we don't even know what the other options are. But for you, I have so much respect for folks who decide to be monogamous, or who decide to like not be in a sexual relationship at all, or a solo poly, or whatever the statuses are. But it's like through a deep conversation with oneself that you get there, rather than that's not allowed, or that's wrong, or that's bad, or that's evil, or whatever those things are that try to shape us. It's like there's not a wrong answer when you get to what is right for you in your adult consenting relationships that are ethical and transparent. There's not a wrong except for if it's wrong for you. And there's not a right except for if it's right for you, as long as you're not hurting others. So I just respect that so much, that is where we can land through those other means as well. Because I feel like we're taught like, well, if you go down that slippery slope, you're just going to be having sex with everything that moves forever. And then you're just going to be this used up, whatever. And it's like, well, some of us will choose this life. Some of us will choose that life. But what does it mean that we're in a life that we didn't choose? Right. So if I am swinging from the rafters, having sex all day, every day, and that is the life that makes me feel most alive in myself, and I feel good in that, that's a very different experience than I feel like what they taught us, which was like, I don't know if you ever had this exercise where they would put tape on everybody, and they would be like, every time you have sex, you basically like get the tape dirty, and then you try to stick it to the next person, and it doesn't stick as well, and eventually like it loses all its stickiness. Awful. But like that's what we were talking about with like sex and sexual partners, and so I just feel like it's so important to
I had other exercises, like getting the water dirty or the milk dirty, Awful. Equally awful.
Oh, awful. So all that to say, I just think there's so many different options and there's so many different ways to be relating to each other. And it doesn't have to be one way. You don't have to be like, this is how I am right now and forever I'll be this way. But also it may end up that you're like with your one person and y'all are monogamous and what, like, that's a possibility. We don't have to shame that, because the other side happens, I think, in queer communities where a lot of folks feel like, well, if I'm not having sex with 3 different people and nesting with one and co-parenting with it, like there's like this whole thing that's like the more complicated your polycule, the more evolved you are or something. But it's like that isn't necessarily where you're going to land. The point is just to continuously be in line with your own self rather than the boxes that society or religion has put you in.
Yeah. And that includes choosing to be asexual. Like,
Yes.
if that's what is that your choice, that's your choice. And everybody needs to respect that. Your body, your rules.
1000%.
Also, I want to name that I started having an issue with purity culture became bigger when it became beyond myself. Like, I had issues because of my own story, which of course I can pin on other causes, not purity culture, but there is a causal correlationship between purity culture and rape culture.
Yes.
So we do have to name that and be very careful about that. So at the same time that we have respect for people who choose to be asexual, and there are people who do not choose asexuality, like that is the way that they were born, right? Like they would say, just as people say, like, I didn't choose to be homosexual, I didn't choose to be heterosexual, I didn't choose to be this or that, I was born this way, that is what I am trying to say. Is not the same to be asexual that to engage in purity culture. Those are 2 different things.
Oh,
that's what I want to say.
Or like side B culture, which is like, I think this is a sin and therefore I'm going to abstain from having sex because I think the sex is a sin because of Christianity, as opposed to somebody who is choosing with their own body, their own autonomy and their own desire. I mean, it's not even just the asexual identity that is like something that you are born with that is inherent to your identity. There's also just the choosing of not having sex for a while with anybody or with just one person or just with yourself as a way of like creating more space. Because Lord knows people talk all the time about like, oh my gosh, you're not monogamous. I have been for now many, many years. And it's like seen sometimes as like, oh, that's so evolved and so cool. And I'm like, it's not about being cool. And actually, it's an incredible amount of work. The quantity of emotional labor, communication, working on your own shit, working on whatever comes up for 2 people or more. Like, it's a lot of labor. Like, it's an incredible amount of labor. And I think I have those moments also where I'm like, I actually don't want to be in a sexual relationship or romantic relationship with more than one person. That doesn't make me not monogamous. That doesn't change that identity for me. It's about literally the capacity that I have and the energy that I have and what's best for myself and whoever else I'm choosing to be in relationship with. So like, there's all these different ways to show up in sexuality that isn't purity culture, even if the practices of having sex or not or whatever look similar.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, I want to ask you a question about institutions, because you have status and standing in both the academic institution as somebody with a PhD, you have standing as somebody with a decade of ordained ministry and many more years before that. You were also a lawyer before theology happened. So like you understand the rules, the laws, the structures for a long time. And I'm wondering how you navigate all of your identities and your fullness in those institutions. Like how that seems so many of us are like, no, forget the institutions. I am such an anti-institutional person at heart. And part of that is just frustration of like, I can't navigate those systems. I can't figure out how to navigate the institutions and still keep myself as myself, that I'm as somebody I'm recognizable to as myself. So how do you do that? Like what has been your strategy, your secret. Like, I remember your dissertation defense, and you were like doing a striptease as part of that. So
it was a burlesque. There's a big difference. No, there's not a big difference, but there's a difference.
Burlesque.
Yeah.
The whole thing is that you have been irreverent from the beginning, and you have really found ways that I've constantly been like, they're not going to let you do that. And sure enough, there you go doing it anyway. So I'm like, I worry for you, and I also admire you. And I wonder if you will tell us a little bit about like, what advice do you have for others? Because I know there's so many of us. There's so few como Latinas, immigrants, first gen, second gen folks in theology in particular, in the church leadership, in a like feminist way, not in a conservative way. So what are your thoughts, or what are your advice, or what are your cautionary tales, or any of that stuff that you have? Because I really want to know that. Like me, I want to know, and I know our listeners want to know too.
Well, I admire you very much. You're a strong person that I was like, wow, Alba I want to be like Alba when I grow up, like Reverend Sex. And like, I want to be like Sophia Divinatrix.
Yes.
I want to be that dominatrix and that strong personality that I give her. I tend to recommend people not to do what I do because it comes at a great cost. It's like, I cannot help it. I try a lot not to go against the institutions, but I cannot help it. I don't know how many times I can say I try to help it, but
like, you're a sinvergüenza at heart.
Exactly. I write down what I'm thinking. I do my exercise, my breathing exercises, and I still, after a while, I just kind of like, and it blur out. My health providers, my therapists, a few of them have told me that I lack filtro. I'm lacking a filter. Recently, a friend of mine who has a kid with and a niece with autism has asked me, are you sure you're not in the spectrum? Which makes sense with that comment from professionals. It's like, oh, maybe that's why maybe I am. That's why I don't have a filter. That is one of the characteristics. So one of the things for self-care when we are people of color in these white serving institutions is to have spiritual disciplines, and spiritual disciplines vary from people to people, from person to person, whatever fits your soul. Yes. Alice Walker put it in somehow in Search for Our Mother's Gardens.
Yes.
Because I don't know if it was her mother, her grandmother, it was gardening, right?
Yeah.
It could be gardening. It could be painting. It could be, in my case, I have a spiritual director. People go to therapists. I recommend that. Everybody should have a therapist. One of the things that I do, because I have been a performing artist my whole life, is that I create characters. And one of the points of highest contention in my career, in my workspace, are faculty meetings. And there was a time that it was getting so bad that I started, thank God it was during the pandemic and after. And so the meetings were online. So I started like wearing witch shoes.
I love it.
It was like, okay, I'm going to bring my witch energy to the faculty meeting. So I was wearing witch shoes. So they couldn't see it. But I was like performing that I was a witch. And I had my witch hat. I didn't wear it, but I had it by the laptop. So I was seeing it. And I felt that I was like dressed like that. I created a character called Dr. Brown Nerd. Dr. Brown Nerd. I created her before I was a doctor. And Dr. Sexy Brown Nerd, Dr. Sexy Brown Nerd. She dresses up sexy with stilettos, black stilettos. A black dress with long sleeves and like collar, and a business jacket that is light pink. But the black dress underneath has a very low cleavage. And then I put my hair in a bun.
Mm-hmm.
So it's this play between respectability politics and super sexy, and then earrings, dangling earrings, and they are plastic, and then the collar is like multi-layered, and those kind of earrings, jewels are not allowed in academic spaces. So you have the business jacket, and you have the black, which are things that academy expects. They expect women to wear business jacket, and they expect women to wear black.
Yes.
But they expect women to wear their hair in a bun, because the hair, it needs to be controlled. Like the women need to be controlled. But they don't expect to see pink, because pink is too girly. You're supposed to be genderless. You're supposed to, paint away your gender. So you're not supposed to show your cleavage. You're not supposed to have dangling earrings.
Or stilettos. Yes.
Which I can barely walk on them anymore. But especially after the surgery that I had. And I wanted to mention about that. It's slightly out of what you're asking, but I think I want to share it because it has to do with how we live our sensuality and how we live our relationships to bear fruit in the world. When I went to surgery, I was really sad that my uterus was going to be taken away, because for some reason I was still dreaming that I would have more children. And you gave me a box with 2 little eggs inside a nest. I still have them in my office. I keep them in my office to remember. And you said a prayer that was something, we did a summer of a mujerista ritual, kind of, or inspired in mujerista theology. And you said some words around the children that I would have, right? Without an uterus. And you were not talking about real children necessarily. But when we started the podcast Teología sin vergüenza, I felt that was our baby. And that was one of the most exciting things about starting the project back then. It was like, finally, Alba and I are going to have a child together. Yes. So
that's right. And that's a very queer concept, right?
Yes.
Of like, we create, and when the Bible says, be fruitful and multiply, that doesn't necessarily have to mean that everybody has to be birthing babies all the time. That means there is what we put our life force into, and that which we put our life force into is what creates and sustains life for us, for each other, for the planet. And so Teología sin vergüenza as our baby was a very queer, beautiful, like, nest being built, which is, I think, speaks to why so many people, we now are like in 39 countries and have followers and have had episodes from almost everyone in Latin America, in Spanish-speaking Latin America, and a few folks in Brazil. But I think it's this orientation of like, we tried to create a nest that we needed and we wanted for ourselves as sinvergüenzas, and that we were inviting other people to be in community with us and to be in our nest, in our home, and we got to create that space together.
Yes, and now that I mentioned the dean of the Vanderbilt Divinity School, when we were there together, she told me that was one way to stay alive in academic spaces, to always have a project that is life-giving for me. And that's something that I still do today. So yeah, that's one way that I would totally recommend people. You always need to do something that gives you life when you are in spaces that are death dealing to you. So I think this season of Teología sin vergüenza in English is very on time, because you're right, these are difficult times for us. And I think what I hope for this season is that we can provide a space for these kind of people that are 3-in-1 to find each other in times that we are vulnerable. So we can be a support group, kind of, in which we can, know that we are, like our slogan says in Spanish, we are not many, but we are here, and we have each other's back. right? We are still being brave from our spaces, in our different spaces. So we are still Christian or whatever spirituality we practice. We are still activists in whatever space we are, and we are still queer.
That's
proud
right.
to be.
Yes, proud to be all of those things. And also that they can't be divided from each other. It's like, this is who we are. And it feels like a coming out to say, we want to come out of all of the closets and be our full selves. And I hope that this is a space where our people can find that, especially folks who are in diaspora and maybe haven't been with us before. I'm so grateful for your time today to get us started for this season. And of course, we always end, as well as I do, we always end with the same question, which is, when you are having those moments when you need to be restored, when you need to be reminded who you are and where you come from, what is your fount of strength, your cloud of witnesses? Who are those ancestors, be they family or cultural icons or thought partners? Who are those folks that you call on to help your spirit be reminded who you are?
I have many. And I have actually an art that I created in which I put a rainbow and I put all of them, like their faces, inside of clouds, because it's my cloud of witnesses and they're there. Even, it doesn't matter if I met them or not, if they are alive or not, you are there, Prisca is there. And I like to start with my mom and my abuelita Justa, because they were the models I had of what a woman is. So I start with them. They model for me femininity and what a strong woman is too, how to survive inside of a family of machistas. There's that.
Yes.
And then in, the wisdom of people like Gloria Saldúa or like Marcela Alsaus-Wright, who opened doors for us to do queer theology and kink theology and talk about the queer God and many other scholars. I also like the writings of Rubén Alves from Brazil, who said that outside of beauty, there is no salvation. And my pedagogy is founded on Paulo Freire and Augusto Boal, Pedagogy of the Oppressed and Theater of the Oppressed, respectively. I have to say that my main theories are the theologian is Marcela Alsaus-Wright, and performance studies is Diana Taylor, who her name doesn't sound like that, but she was born in Mexico, raised in Mexico, and most recently was teaching at NYU. I haven't checked her bio recently, but the last time I checked, she was teaching at New York University in the Department of Theater, and she studied in Canada, went back to Mexico, and naturalized in the United States. So she's part also of this diasporic life.
Yes.
So many other ancestors.
Yes. I feel like one of the biggest compliments we've gotten via Sin Vergüenza Andre Muskov was that, as a collaborator with Marcela, as somebody who was in her thought circle, one of her students, one of her colleagues, they'd say, this is the direction she was going. Teología sin vergüenza is the continuation of that spirit. So I feel like Marcela is one of those ancestors for Teología sin vergüenza as well. So I'm glad to hear that she's one of yours. And we didn't even get to talk about the theater studies, but I feel like your embodiment with theater, church, and homiletics is like a whole other episode of Teología sin vergüenza that I would love to get into. But thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. Thank you for starting us off, and I look forward to coming seasons where you're back in the co-host seat with me.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this new invento, embeleco, and this new adventure of Teología sin vergüenza. And I am so delighted to be part of this crossover.
Yeah.
Gracias por escucharnos. Síguenos en las redes sociales @teosinvergüenza y únete a nuestra lista de difusión en WhatsApp. Comparte tus ideas y tus historias con nuestra comunidad en Facebook o Instagram usando el hashtag #LasSinvergüenzas.
Comparte este episodio con alguien a quien amas y danos 5 estrellas en la plataforma donde escuchas este podcast.
Y pendiente a nuestro próximo episodio para que conozcas a otra teóloga sin vergüenza de ser activista.
Somos las Sinvergüenzas.
¿Eres tú uno de nosotros?
¡Sí!